Hi everyone, this is the Stolery channel and my name is Alex. This is the second part of a video about the Chicago Exposition of 1893, and today we learn a few more mystical facts about it. The first part is in the description below the video. Okay, here we go. Late 19th century. The population of the United States is 65 million. On May 1st, 1893, the world's Columbian Exposition opens in Chicago and 27 million people attend. That means half the population of the United States came to the expo. All age groups, from children to the elderly, were expected to attend. Let's take a look at the photos from the opening of the exhibition. I didn't find a single elderly person in this photo. There is only one child sitting on the roof of the wagon. Next photo. We see mostly young men. Very few women. Just one elderly person standing in the center. It's kind of weird that we see mostly young men. Here are many more people, but it's impossible to determine their ages. Only you can't see the little kids? We see many women and men in this photo. No old people in sight. There's only one boy present. The World Expo opened in May, but for May, people are very warmly dressed. Alright, let's leave the children and old people alone for now. Maybe I'm looking for them for nothing. After all, it was a World's Fair, so there must be a lot of foreign tourists on it. And they were probably young people from Europe. At the end of the 19th century, there was still no air service between continents. Therefore, tourists from Europe could only arrive at the exhibition by sea. Let's look at the volume of passenger transportation in the late 19th century. We have an interesting document about passenger transportation from Europe to America from 1890 to 1914. The link is in the description. There is unfortunately no data on 1893, but there are statistics for 1898. In 1898, 300,000 passengers arrived from Europe to the United States in the ship's second and third classes. The number of first-class passengers is not specified. Roughly add the 200,000 people who arrived first class. There can hardly be more than second and third class passengers. First class has always carried fewer passengers. For one thing, it was more expensive and the first class cabins held fewer passengers. In the late 19th century, it was physically impossible for international transportation companies to move more than 500,000 people a year from Europe to the Americas. So even if you theorize that all the people who came from Europe to America in 1893 attended the exposition, it couldn't have been more than 500,000 people. The exhibition was visited by 27 million people. Let's say 500,000 foreigners arrived. We get that the exhibit was more than 90% filled by people from the United States. If 90% of the attendees were Americans, that means half of the people in America dropped what they were doing and went to the expo. Judging by the photos, the most able-bodied part of the population came. Very few old people and children. A large percentage of the population in America was engaged in agriculture, and it turns out farmers abandoned their fields and herds of cows unattended to attend the show. I also didn't see African Americans in the photos, although they may have made up 15% of the population of the United States during this period. Now let's remember that in 1893, the largest financial crisis in the history of the United States occurred. People were losing their jobs and their homes. There's a crisis in the country, and the entire able-bodied part of the American population has gone to a trade show to have fun. It's all very strange. We will come back to this issue. Who are these people? 27 million Americans traveled to the Chicago Exposition despite the financial crisis. Judging by the photos, they are mostly young people under the age of 40. This is not the first time in the history of the United States that the entire able-bodied population has abandoned its business and gone to see an exhibition. On May 10, 1876, the first International Exposition opened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The exhibition covered an area of 115 hectares and was visited by 10 million people. The entire population of the United States in 1876 was 45 million. That means 1 in 4 people in the United States traveled to the expo. Most of the buildings on the fairgrounds were built as temporary structures, but the scale of the main buildings is impressive. In less than 2 years, 200 temporary exhibition buildings were constructed. I'll show you the best part. The main building was the largest in the world, covering nearly 9 acres, 459 feet wide by 1,968 feet long. It was built using prefabricated parts with a wood and iron frame sitting on a foundation and 600 stone piers. The rafters were made of wrought iron. The building took 18 months to construct. After the Exposition, the building was turned into a permanent building for an international exhibition. On December 1, 1876, the building was sold for $250,000. But the owner faced financial difficulties in maintaining the building. In 1881, the main exhibition building was demolished. The next building is the engine room, 1312 feet long, 393 feet wide. It was built in 6 months. The machine room was a showcase of 19th century technology. One of the main attractions was a steam engine weighing 650 tons and standing 49 feet high. The machine room had 8,000 operating machines and was filled with a wide variety of hand tools and machine tools. The art gallery building was designed by Hermann Schwartzman, made of brick, iron, and granite. At the time, it was the largest art hall in the country with a 164-foot dome. This building has survived and is now known as the Memorial Hall. Here is another interesting building, the Agricultural Hall, 8 on 20 feet long, 524 feet wide, built of wood and glass. And here's a picture of the garden room, 383 feet long, 193 wide, and 69 feet high. This building was not destroyed until 1954 by Hurricane Hazel. And here's another building that's interesting in its name, the Women's Pavilion. A huge women's pavilion was also built at the Chicago Exposition. There are many more interesting buildings. The link is in the description. As we can see, the Philadelphia exhibit was built in less than 2 years. Most of the buildings were built as temporary structures, but somehow 2 buildings survived into the 20th century. These are the Memorial Hall, which was built in less than 2 years, and the Horticultural Hall, which stood until 1958. It feels like the rest of the buildings were not temporary structures either and were demolished for some unknown reason. What's also astounding is the phenomenal attendance. 20% of Americans attended the Exposition. And they were Americans because the steamship intercontinental companies could not physically carry more than 500,000 people a year from Europe to America. Okay, let's leave the Philly Expo and go back to the Chicago Expo. Let's try to figure out what the Chicago World's Fair was for. I was struck by the sheer number of statues in the pavilions and on the roofs of the exhibition buildings. The amount is unbelievable. It's as if they were collected from museums in Europe, but no one brought them in. They were made locally. If we look at the photos of the construction of the exhibit, we can see the process of making the statue. Here, take a look at these photos. There is a large statue standing and a small one next to it, as if for a specimen. And you'd think the sculptor was just modeling a large statue. But if we look at the pictures from the Louisiana World's Fair that was held in 1904, that's also a very interesting exhibit. It deserves its own video. So here we have a photo from an exhibit in Louisiana that uses a primitive copy machine to take the dimensions from a small statue and scale them to a larger one. This is where we see the sculptor standing proudly. On the left, we have a smaller copy of this large composition. And here we have molded stucco. And this photo is a masterpiece in general, something like Atlanta in the Hermitage. Look at how the veins on the foot are drawn. Nearby stands a small replica of the giant, from which all dimensions have somehow been transferred. Here are hundreds of blanks cast in plaster. If we go back to this photo again, we can see that in the late 19th century it was possible to make copies from small figures with size scaling without much difficulty. So, back to the Chicago Exposition. Again, we see a large statue with a small copy standing next to it. We see that in the late 19th century, copies of very complex sculptures were easily made. A special material was used for this purpose. This material is like an artificial stone used to cover and decorate temporary buildings. It is basically made of powdered gypsum, with a little cement, glycerin, and dextrin mixed with water until it is about as thick as molasses. It can be poured into any complex mold. Its natural color is cloudy white, but it can be made to look like any stone. This material is called personnel and was invented in France in 1876. It was used extensively in the construction of exhibition buildings in Chicago at the Omaha and Buffalo Expositions, and in Louisiana in 1904. An exhibition in Chicago illustrates the ease with which ancient statues can be copied. If you think of the Hermitage collection in St. Petersburg, maybe that's an exhibition too? And all of these statues were made in 1 year using the same techniques as the Chicago exhibit? After all, what we see in the Hermitage now is a new model, early 20th century. After all, at the end of the 19th century, the Hermitage was an empty, huge box of an ancient building, which was then filled with furniture and attributes made of wood and plaster. In fact, even now most of the columns are made of wood and simply marbleized. Here, for example, is what Nicholas I's bathroom looked like in the Winter Palace. As we can see, it is a quick-build structure. The walls and floor are clad in wood. The next interesting thing about the Chicago Exposition is this. Representatives from almost every nation that lives around the world were represented. Here's a look at the faces of Americans. It's as if they are in class. The exhibition program is designed to tell you everything about the world around you. These are the pictures that introduce people to painting. And this is where they show the history of the Indians. And this is a Yucatan ruin. The exhibit in the Women's Pavilion is again very much an educational project. It's like this place was taught how to properly care for children. Here's an exhibit that really surprised me. 1898 Omaha Exposition, Intensive Care Incubator. I thought it was a 20th century invention. And it turns out it was invented back in 1891. So, judging by all the exhibits at the Chicago World's Fair and other similar shows, it's more of a non-entertainment event. It's like a place that shapes a person's worldview. Here, as if new members of society are told about the achievements of science and technology, about other countries and peoples, introduced to painting, as well as taught how to deal with small children. It's like a new world is being opened up here for people who don't know anything. And they even came up with a symbol for this new world. There seems to be nothing strange in the fact that the World Exhibition is educational in nature. There's just one thing. That's a phenomenal attendance for this exhibit. As a reminder, it was visited by 27 million people. They were mostly young Americans with no children or elders. There's a crisis in the country and all the workforce is traveling to trade shows. It seems to me that the exhibitions were almost forced events. Here's a look at the Omaha 1898 entertainment ticket. Judging by the look and the plaque, this is what a person who received an invitation to a concentration camp might look like. All of these exhibitions seem to have been engaged in the forced education of new members of society. And these people didn't come voluntarily from all over the country. It looks like they were centralized to be delivered to this exhibit. Where could such a mass of uneducated middle-aged people come from? I think it may have something to do with the huge number of fires that occurred in the Americas in the 18th and 19th century. From 1760 through 1928, there were a total of 101 major fires in the United States in which cities completely burned out. It was almost every year in 19th century America that a city burned down. There doesn't seem to be anything strange about these fires. The people who walk through the ruins of burned cities look strange. Here's a look at the people walking through the ruins of Baltimore City. In 1904, Baltimore experienced a fire that destroyed 1,500 buildings. We're not going to get into the cause of the fire right now. Fires are a huge topic in their own right. Let us look at pictures of people walking around the ruins. Look at their clothes and how they look around in surprise. And here we have the Chicago Fire of 1871. A large part of the city burned. And in a strange way, this alleged fire scattered bricks in the streets. find the differences from the photos of destroyed cities after the bombing by airplanes in 1945. And here we have walking people again. People who are just curious about the ruins. Now let's move on to San Francisco. In 1906, the city was hit by a massive earthquake followed by a fire. The city was completely destroyed. Look at these people walking around town. Also, look at these ruins. Is it not strange that they really look like this town was destroyed after the Second World War bombing? It's like a group of hikers found something interesting here. These ones are just taking in the sights. And here are the souvenir hunters. Here's where a group of men look on as the city burns to the ground. And this is my favorite picture. Look at the group of men on the right. They got very comfortable. Pull up chairs and watch a fire show. Actors? It's possible. All of these people bear little resemblance to the people of the city. It feels like they were just recently brought in. And they just let you familiarize yourself with the new destroyed territories. I think it's the new population of the city. I don't know where these people are from. Maybe it's the residents of other destroyed American cities who have had their memories erased. And what's interesting is that there are always a lot of middle-aged men and women in the ruins of American cities. Almost always in dark clothing. But there are very few small children. And it's weird too. The average American family in the 19th century had several children, but there are a lot of middle-aged people at the World's Fair in Chicago, and very few children. There are middle-aged people strolling through the ruins of American cities. Once again, there are almost no children. And those weird stories about orphan trains. It is very strange that tens of thousands of orphans were brought centrally to America. So, I think American fires and World's Fairs are links in the same chain. People who had a poor understanding of what was going on around them or remembered nothing from their past were centrally brought by the millions to exhibitions where they were given full information about the world around them, and the necessary past was imposed on them. Talked about advances in technology and even how to care for young children. The World's Fair is a huge machine for creating a new reality. And it wasn't just in America that such exhibitions took place. You just compare those who walk through the ruins of cities and visitors to exhibitions. I think it's the same people. If anyone has more detailed and documented data about burning cities or world exhibitions, be sure to let me know and we'll discuss it together. Be sure to subscribe, put likes, share this video with everyone. Thanks for watching.